All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up for this month's BSEC seminar. Really excited that we're going to hear more about the U.S. Forest Service Baltimore Field Station and the work that Nancy and Dexter and all are doing there. Nancy, Sonti, and Dexter Locke will be our two presenters, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Nancy.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to just give a little introduction overview to the Forest Service's Urban Field Station Network and the Baltimore Field Station, just in case folks aren't familiar. And then Dexter's going to take a deeper dive into some of our research that is, that was included in the BSEC grant, and that's like sort of most directly applicable, perhaps. So I'm a research ecologist, and just like big picture, Forest Service, of course, the largest portion of the Forest Service is our national forest system, but we also have a research branch, research and development, and that's where Dexter and I are, and the rest of our colleagues at the Baltimore Field Station. There's also state, private, and tribal forestry as well. And so within R&D, within research and development, we have this network of urban research stations, urban locations, and we kind of think about places that have been designated as an urban field station in blue, where the staff are really focused on working in that location. Although we like to say we're place-based, but not place-bound. So we do focus on the city that we're in, but of course we can lift up and think about urban areas across the country, or applying our research on the urban to rural gradient. And then the pink dots are places where we just might happen to have staff, scientists who do kind of dabble in urban research, but we don't always have the agency support, I guess, to anoint an urban field station in every region. And as you can see, like a lot of our locations are in the Northeast. But we welcome kind of the cross collaboration among different regions. And one way that we kind of think about how we are branching out into urban areas is based on our idea of experimental forests and ranges. So shortly after the Forest Service was established in the early 1900s, we established experimental forests and ranges. So these are places on Forest Service land where scientists work with collaborators to address long-term research questions. So many of these sites have been around for decades. Here's a picture of Hubbard Brook. Hubbard Brook happens to also be an NSF-funded LTER, and is, sort of pioneered watershed ecology and answered some really seminal questions about acid rain and deforestation and nutrient dynamics. And so in Baltimore, that's a little bit of our intellectual legacy. Was Baltimore also started as an NSF-funded LTER. That was kind of at the same time that the Forest Service started working in Baltimore in the late 90s. Also thinking about the system, an urban watershed system. But there's some real differences here in the models. Hubbard Brook is like a site with a gate. We kind of say there's a key to get in, there's a gatekeeper. It's kind of obvious who owns the land, how you would approach working there, who you would talk to. When we think about an urban field station, I mean, we're thinking about the whole mosaic. And I know with this group, obviously, it's that's kind of an obvious point. But, thinking back a couple of decades, that's not so obvious, just to think about how to work in an urban system across all these different ownerships and land uses. And I think the role that we often play in the Forest Service, we're not regulatory, right? We're not the landowners in cities, but we can kind of convene and connect folks and ideally bring science into conversation with land management and practice. So very similar to, the goals of BSEC, which is why it's really exciting to be part of it. And, from the start in our urban field stations, we've been thinking about the whole social ecological system, right? And again, I know for this crowd, I don't have to hammer the point that these systems are very complex with lots of feedbacks and flows and lagged effects and all of that. But that's something that we do sometimes have to really keep communicating within the Forest Service, right, to our counterparts about But we like to bring in our sort of traditional Forest Service scientists into the city and really work on exchanging knowledge across the urban to rural continuum. And our teams in each location are relatively small, so it's not like we can have every discipline represented in every location. So we do, ideally work across locations and share knowledge. Ian is our soil scientist extraordinaire. We certainly don't have an Ian in every city, so he's called upon sometimes for his expertise. And I just wanted to highlight a few tools that we sort of ideally have in each of our urban field station locations, and that we kind of think of as like getting off the ground, getting started with an urban field station, or kind of approaching urban ecology, interfacing with practice and management. And so folks are probably familiar with some of these, but iTree, of course, is the suite of software tools that kind of ranges from residents monitoring their backyard tree or school groups, all the way up to citywide inventories or regional planning, even thinking about urban forest benefits. And urban FIA is something I'd be happy to talk more about, and I've wondered if it might eventually fit into BSEC modeling, but essentially it's more it's also urban forest inventory, but kind of led by the Forest Service. So a lot of QA/QC and kind of quality control of the data, and the data is all publicly available on the FIA website, and Baltimore's data was actually just published recently. So that's kind of exciting. So we might want to think about how that could fit into any of our carbon modeling. Urban tree canopy, something that Dexter and our colleague Morgan Grove are really instrumental in sort of pioneering these high resolution urban tree canopy mapping, monitoring, and then thinking about how you can use that to prioritize planting in certain neighborhoods. And then StewMap, Dexter's going to talk more about in a bit, looking at environmental stewardship. And thinking about our Baltimore location specifically, we're kind of always evolving, but this is our stated, our mission statement, certainly linking our science to the Chesapeake Bay and to improving urban residents, quality of life and urban natural resource management. And these are the topics that we sort of currently have staff that are working on these. And so even though we're kind of focused on StewMap for today, as I mentioned Ian, we have a soil scientist, I'm a forest ecologist. So Ian and I are also on the veg and soils team for BSEC. And then we have a few social scientists working on kind of different and varied topics. Last thing I'll mention is the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. So this is something we've invited Ben to present at, and I think our next meeting, we might even have more BSEC representation, as we're sort of troubleshooting different wicked problems associated with urban flooding, I guess, is what I would say. Backing up, there are quarterly meetings that we hold. Urban Waters Federal Partnership was established to bring federal partners together to solve local problems and to connect with local and regional and state practitioners. And so anyway, urban flooding has been a major topic that has been a thread throughout our location since it started in 2011. And our next meeting in October, we specifically wanted to bring in some folks from BSEC who have experience working with community partners, because that's one of the aspects, I guess, of urban flooding that can be really difficult to tackle, is getting information out or receiving information from the community. I'm not a hydrologist, but Morgan and I are the federal leads for our Baltimore Urban Waters location. And so we do our best to link water to ecology, to forestry through this regional network. And we have the University of Maryland Extension as our local ambassadors, which has been a really great partnership as well. And there's certainly some overlap between folks that attend Urban Waters and BSEC. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dexter, and happy to answer questions or go into more detail about any topic.
Do a couple of quick clarifying questions before the next one, or how do you want to?
I have a quick question. Hi, it's Farmer Chippy from Baltimore, Plantation Park
Hi.
Heights Urban Farm. Hi, can you talk a little bit more about how you involve the community?
Just through our field station. So, and when you say the community, do you mean community members, residents? You don't mean professionals, right? Yeah.
Residents. Yeah.
Residents. So I think that I'd say often we do it through our municipal and nonprofit partners. Like they will invite us, Baltimore Green Space is a prime example. Ian and I show up for Katie. We speak to residents that she convenes in a forest patch. We present our science. We listen to their feedback. We understand what they want to see out of the spaces that they're stewarding or what questions they have about those spaces. And then we work with Katie and her staff to design protocols or products or events that meet their needs. I think, DPW is another great example. They have the grow centers and events like that. And so they're often asking us to come out and attend community events that way. But there are times where it's more direct. We've been working with Still Meadow Community Fellowship Church quite a bit lately. And so I think with Still Meadow, again, Still Meadow's they're really the ones directly on the ground interfacing with the neighbors, but we show up for them and sort of help, again, like listen to the needs of the community and what they want to see out of that land and how we can help. But I think, I don't want to speak for Dexter and Ian, but I think we would welcome hearing your feedback or suggestions if there's ways that we could do that better.
Yeah, we can talk offline, but yeah, I definitely would love to be a part of it. I'd like to be part of that conversation with you for sure. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. And Dexter and Ian, feel free to add anything to that response if you want.
I think those are some of the main buckets in ways. And then I'll add StewMap, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. It's kind of a perfect segue where it's about surveying and mapping and doing network analysis on the stewardship groups themselves. So we do try to create the best we can this database of community groups and to put them on the map and to show where there are gaps, where there are overlaps, opportunities, differences, things like that. And so we get community input through studying the community groups in that way.
Hi. I'm curious as to whether or not there are sort of plans from the different communities in terms of to increase the amount of trees, or do they have that as a part of their local plan to identify where the trees would be and how that might be changing the complexity of the surface conditions across Baltimore as a whole, and what would be the best tools that would be to try and create a picture for 10 years from now as to what might be possible?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, for sure. Baltimore City has a goal of 40% tree canopy cover, and the city's forestry division certainly has their own plans. Dexter helped them develop a prioritization map based on the 2007 imagery for where canopy existed and where, first thinking about where it exists and where it's possible to increase it, and then also prioritizing neighborhoods based on different criteria and convening different stakeholders to rank those criteria. And they're talking about redoing it with more recent imagery. But another thing that your question makes me think about is there's just this huge infunding of Inflation Reduction Act funding So Baltimore Tree Trust received, I think, $7 million. And so that is going to be a lot of tree planting. And I wonder, I mean, it'll be other programs as well, but I do wonder if there could be some interesting modeling or, you know, projecting there to like think about what neighborhoods they're planning to work in and predicting what, as you said, what the canopy cover might look like 10 years from now. Because we're kind of in a huge like change point in urban forestry with all this funding coming in.
Right, and that's something that we'd like to be developing plans to how to understand the heat maps and water distribution for 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. So if there are resources that would also be helping us, that would be great.
I think it would be
That's a great
sitting down
segue.
and talking to them. Like, I don't think there's a, you know, there's not a ready-made map or data file, but we have to reach out and start asking them what their plans are. Sorry, Dexter, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe that's a great segue to StewMap. I can talk about what it is and how it dovetails with BSEC, and maybe some queries of that data might connect you to groups that could then inform that kind of planning. So this talk is full of links, but I know it's recorded, but you can't click on the links while I'm talking. So I just threw a bunch in the chat. I hope that's not distracting. The intention is to be helpful. So let me just did this. What happened? Cool. All right. Are you seeing my slides? Yes.
That's
no?
great.
Thanks. Great. Great. So I'm Dexter Locke. I'm a research geographer with the USDA Forest Service, and I work in the Baltimore Field Station, which Nancy just described. And I'm going to talk about StewMap, which is this funky acronym for Stewardship, Mapping, and Assessment Project. And it's definitely a team effort with Nancy Morgan at the Forest Service and colleagues at some other institutions, including UMBC. So brief outline, why do we need StewMap? What's the background? What are the other StewMaps in other cities? StewMap is part of a multi-city analysis. I'm going to share some recent Baltimore findings and try to provide some of those on-ramps to how StewMap might be helpful and useful and part of BSEC. So the idea was there's a lot of maps of green infrastructure, of gray infrastructure. Nancy was just talking about tree canopy prioritization, and we've helped develop some of those tools from remote sensing to stakeholder engagement. But there's less information about the social landscape or social infrastructure on environmental stewardship groups. And so StewMap has been conducted in Baltimore in 2011 and 2019. It's a set of methods, a methodology, and creates data across cities. There's three main facets or domains of environmental stewardship organizations that all the implementations and their different local variations have encompassed. And that's one, the organizational characteristics. So are you a 501c3? Do you have a board? Do you have dues paying members? How many paying members? What types of sites do you work on? Do you do trees or green infrastructure? Are you working on waterfront access or animal rights? So those are the organizational characteristics. The second domain or facet of the environmental stewardship landscape that we measure is spatial. So where does the group work? So we put that into GIS in two different ways. One, we ask an open-ended question. Describe where you work. And we say, we work at Susie Q's Community Garden on 123 Main Street. And we go to the parcel map and we grab that parcel and we put that in there. Or someone could say, we work in these zip codes, and we can grab that. We work in these watersheds, and we take those polygons and include that in the map. The second way we do it in Baltimore, and this is a little bit different from other cities, is we provide a map that says, here's the map of the neighborhoods in Baltimore City, according to the planning department, which I think is a pretty faithful representation of the neighborhoods in most cases. Check all that apply. And so it's very quick because we can readily join that to the map and produce counts very quickly. The third facet or domain of stewardship organizations are the networks. Who works with who? The National Aquarium says, I work with these organizations, and those organizations say they work with those organizations. And we actually collect the network in sub-networks. We ask about knowledge, so information sharing resources, and a couple other sub-networks. And then, of course, these data streams fit together where we can filter organizations that are doing green infrastructure work in certain neighborhoods, or ask which groups does this green infrastructure group work with through the network data. So it's all connected, which is important. And so I just want to mention also, when I say stewardship, we define environmental stewardship very broadly as groups that can serve, manage, monitor, educate, advocate, partner about the local environment. We also define environment very broadly. You see some examples on the screen now, but land, air, water, toxics, energy issues, very broad umbrella. But within that, to be included, you have to be an organization, so not just an individual, work within Baltimore City, and you have to say that you do at least one variety of stewardship as we have defined it. So multi-city context, this is from the Forest Service website, where you can see, again, highlighting the organizational data, the geographic or spatial, and the network data. You can click through these tabs, plenty of great resources, but it was developed in New York City. It's been repeated in New York City. It's been repeated in Baltimore, LA River, Watershed, Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, and a growing number of places outside of the US, including Paris, Santo Domingo, in Colombia, Valledupar. So it's a growing network of researchers who are in part doing network analysis about environmental stewardship groups. So we're just one little node in this greater constellation. But enough about Colombia and Paris. What about Baltimore? Naturally, the reports we produce are in ravens and orioles colors. That's no accident, but we have reports on our website that tabulate some of the organizational characteristics, some spatial summaries, and again, the networks for 2011. We recollected data in 2019. Nancy led some reports. We make all the data freely available through being part of Baltimore Ecosystem Study. We put it on the Environmental Data Initiative website for all the LTER data. There's also access to the Forest Service, trying to make as many roads to the same destination as possible for all the different outputs. And I'll just mention that we sort of started backwards. First, there was a dissertation, and then journal articles, and now reports and data. And we learned from that, and we really want to make news you can use kind of outputs. And so we have interactive maps where you can click and filter and search and scroll and all kinds of things like that. Trying to put the data that we've collected into the hands of people who can use it in whatever format that is. Some people just want a screenshot of a chart, and some want the actual CSV or shapefiles, and we've tried to accommodate that. If there's something you want to see from StewMap that you don't see, let us know, and if it exists, we can get it to you. So some of the findings. So here's a graph of the number of groups or percentage of groups within the 2019 data by type. And so you can see most of the data are coming from nonprofits or community groups. And that's good. That's what we intended, given our definitions of environmental stewardship. This is what we would expect. We do see some public agencies and some quasi-public and private. But mostly the stewardship landscape in Baltimore City are nonprofits and community groups, as one might have anticipated. What are groups working on? So this is a check all that apply questions. They don't add up to 100. What are the organization foci? Unsurprisingly, again, environment comes to the top, but many of these groups are doing community improvement, education, crime and criminal justice, things that might not directly be related to the environment at first, or it might only be part of their focus showing that this is, of course, an environment-focused group of groups, but they also have a bunch of diverse types of programming and organization foci. They work on a variety of topics, of which environment and in its different flavors or variety is sometimes just one part of that. Another check all that apply question. I mentioned we define stewardship as groups that conserve, manage, monitor, educate, or advocate or partner about the local environment. Partnership is a big one, especially in a survey about networks. This was not an answer choice we provided in 2011. And based on our experience in other cities, it was suggested that we add it. And lo and behold, it's the most popular type of stewardship, partnering, followed by education and advocacy. Note that the active things like conserving and restoring, although very common, are less common or less popular than education and advocacy. What are the types of places these groups work? We've clustered them into parks, open space, built environment, water, and agriculture. So this relates to the question I think Chris was asking. We can filter these data by who's working on parks or vacant lots. For the water modeling, we might be interested in what are the groups that do anything related to water, from watersheds to streams or rivers, working on wetland features or waterfronts. And you can see the distribution here of project site types. We've been doing this survey over time now. So here I'm showing the 2011 and 2019 data. Notice that almost all of the 2019 choices are to the left or less common than the 2011 choices. This might suggest that environmental stewardship groups are becoming more focused in the types of stewardship groups, in the types of activities that they're doing. Instead of a broad sort of shotgun approach, they're becoming more specified in the type of environmental stewardship that they're doing. We also added a couple of answer choices based on fill in the blank from the previous time and sibling sites across the country. We realized that these were important to break out. But because we have this survey over time, we can start to ask questions. Are groups becoming more concentrated in their site types? And this would suggest so. Another piece of organizational characteristics, when were you founded? Note that there's a handful of groups from before the 1900s. Many of these groups persist. And as part of being a long-term ecological research site, having long-term data on environmental stewardship organizations lets us understand how groups merge, separate, go under, new groups start. Morgan Grove talks about, in sort of morbid terms, group birth and group death. When we're analyzing which groups have taken the survey over time, and which are new groups, and which are groups that have folded. Budget. I just want to point out here, many of the groups are small in terms of budget, under the 50,000 mark. But there's also a handful of groups operating in millions or multiple millions, with the caveat, of course, that most groups decline to answer this question for privacy reasons. I'm going to skip ahead. I feel like it's maybe too many factoids. Where's the money coming from? By and large, individual giving, followed by government, and then foundations. These are the three primary sources of funding, which is interesting to know because individuals change their priorities, governments change their priorities, so do foundations. So if so much of this great work from community gardens and waterfront access and green infrastructure and tree planting and maintenance is funded by these sources, some of these are more sustainable or permanent than others. Only 2% of the groups are receiving endowments, and that kind of continued financial budget source. So all of that was organizational characteristics. I'll highlight some of the spatial work. So this is a map just showing the number of organizations per neighborhood. that we've collected in the StuMap data. On the right, I've taken the same map, but I filter only the park groups. So it looks pretty similar, right? Because the map on the right is a subset of the map on the left. But there are actually a couple of key differences if you focus on a couple of examples. I can do that again, looking at the built environment. Again, the right is a subset of the left, but it's not exactly the same. Water groups, plausibly of interest to BSEC. Agriculture, Farmer Chippy's on the line, but agriculture is one of the most rare types of environmental stewardship in our data based on the groups that responded to our surveys. More of the mapping, I mentioned we collect the spatial data in two ways. One is the check all that apply for neighborhoods. The other is a text description, which then we go and digitize. One of the links I put in the chat brings you to the 2011 map. The other brings you to the 2019 map. And you can zoom and filter and click around, and you get almost all the groups. Some groups opted to not be on the public website, so we honor that privacy concern. But most of the data are on there, and you see here, there's a nice little sample of the website, the contact information, the types of stewardship they do. So this would be a great resource for finding organizations that might be working on different site types. So that was the spatial part. I'm going to talk the least about networks. So we ask, who do you work with? And so we can create these network diagrams that show which organizations are connected to which organizations. In degree is how many groups say that they work with a particular group. So I might say I work with this group, that group, and the other group, and only two of those three groups say that they work with me. So the ties are directional. So we can say, where do we have strong ties? I work with Nancy, and Nancy works with me, as opposed to saying, I work with so-and-so, but they did not list me. Or someone says that they work with me, but I failed to list them. So we can get these kind of directional associations in the network. We can filter this by all the other data, the spatial data, the organizational characteristics. We can do analysis to say, is this becoming more dense over time or more disaggregated? We could compare, for example, tree stewardship networks to green infrastructure networks. Are they more centralized or more dispersed? And also it lets us understand who are the key brokers, who are the key nodes. If you have an important message you want to broadcast, whose listserv do you need to get onto because they're plugged into so many other groups? Or if this particular organization folded, what is the network that would no longer be connected? So how does that group help connect organizations that would otherwise not be connected? As part of BSEC, there was some funding for a postdoc. We hired Selena a few weeks ago. She's a sociologist by training. All she does is networks, and she does a great job. And so we're really excited to dig into this aspect of the StuMap data, which has often been neglected or understudied due to lack of funding or expertise. And so we're really excited about the opportunities of further getting into the network analysis. With that, I'm going to wrap up and just say a few summaries. So the Baltimore data were collected in 2011 and 2019. Again, we look at the organizational characteristics, the spatial aspects, or where they work, and then who they work with. And this is to add a layer of information about the social landscape of environmental stewardship. We're part of many cities doing similar data collection and analysis. We're trying to make all the data and reports available, and we're accepting queries. When we were at the more preliminary stages, when the data weren't quite published yet, DPW would say, hey, we're doing a growth center in these 3 neighborhoods. Who are the groups that we need to connect with? And we could send them a directory of the most relevant organizations in those places according to those characteristics. We'd be happy here as well. So thanks for your attention. This was a team effort. Nancy and Morgan, Michelle, Sarah, and Molly all contributed to the behind the scenes in this presentation. So thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy and Dexter. So much food for thought here. You can see the activity in the chat and the discussion about how exciting it is to think about how we can work to leverage some of these relationships for BSEC and other efforts. I'll give people a minute, Dexter and Nancy, maybe if you want to look through the chat, since I'm sure it's hard for you to follow while speaking, see if there's anything you want to respond to there. And then we can also ask if anyone else has questions or discussion points.
Hey, thanks, Ken, for moving the files. Appreciate that. Interfaith, I believe, are respondents. I'd have to check. Nancy, do you happen to recall if Interfaith?
I'm pretty sure they're respondents, but they were on our list to be data providers. And I just remember that they were concerned about privacy because, working with congregations. So we went back and forth about them sharing their list of congregations to get the StewMap survey. And I think in the end we did sort of, allay their concerns, but regardless, we have a great relationship with them.
So Nancy mentioned data providers, which reminded me, I failed to mention a pretty important part of the survey. The way that we decide which organizations get surveys is we went to the 2011 data and these large partner nodes. So groups that we know, we talked about the 2011 data, and before that, in 2009 and 2010, we went to these different organizations who had these large rosters of groups they work with already. And we said, we're trying to survey all the environmental stewardship groups. Here's how related research in other cities has gone. We're trying to understand the social landscape of environmental groups in the city. Are you willing to share your data? And so we had these data providers send us their contacts, and then we merged all those lists together and deduplicated them from almost tens of thousands down to thousands. And then we send that out to who we hope will fill out the survey, and we remind them. And then in Baltimore, unlike some of the other cities, as the network responses come in, we cross-reference them with, did they ever get a survey in the first place? And if they didn't get a survey, we send them a survey, and then we start sending them reminders. So it's as exhaustive as we could possibly be, given the usual constraints of time and money. But so yes, we have these data providers, we merge and dedupe, and then we do this continued follow-up, and then new groups that we learn about are added as needed. Sorry, I failed to mention that.
And Dexter, sorry if I missed it, but did you mention Selena?
Yes, we hired postdoc Selena. She started a few weeks ago with BSEC funds at UMBC. She's a sociologist by training, network expert, and she's starting to analyze our 2019 data. The postdoc's a little bit backwards. Rather than start, collect data, analyze data, publications, we have data. We're starting with the publications, and when we leave, or when Selena moves on, we hope that we have more recommendations for best practices for how we would collect StewMap data in the future, how to ask certain questions in a better way. Yeah. Any other pieces?
Yeah. I believe she went to the orientation, or at least part of the orientation that just happened. She's struggling with COVID, so we're trying to let her recover. But she is going to start attending, which of the teams, Dexter? I always forget the name.
Decision science.
Decision science, right. So we're going to get her plugged in, and she's, there. Yeah, if there's ways that she can be helpful. She's great quantitative analysis skills, a network analyst. So yeah, we're excited to have her start.
There we go. I don't know if you guys see in the chat this what Farmer Chippy just put in about the Harry Hughes Center for Agroecology. Is that something that you guys are aware of or are working with at all?
I'm certainly aware of them. They recently put out a really comprehensive report on forest change in Maryland. Worked in part with our colleague Jarlath O'Neill Dunn up in Vermont, who does a lot of the remote sensing analysis. So I mean, I guess I'm aware of them sort of, I think, getting contracts to produce products like that. I don't know that we've like collaborated on projects specifically with them, but I certainly think that could be a good idea to reach out.
Yeah, Farmer Chippy, do you have anything else you want to say about them?
Yeah, it's a wonderful collection of folks, and they can add value to what we intend to do. And it would be nice to have some of them contribute their specialities here in Baltimore City. And I think we can make it possible because I sit on a board with them, and I think they're amazing. So it would be nice for us to talk to each other and see how best we can add more fuel to the fire.
That's great. Peter.
Good morning. Lovely talk. So I know you've been collecting the StewMap data for a long time in Baltimore, and have there been any observations of how the importance of different groups has ebbed and has changed over time? I mean, so one of the things that we observed informally in New York is, for a while, all the young people wanted to go work for the city because the city had health benefits and retirement, but then now everybody wants to go work for nonprofits because the nonprofits have more flexible work schedules than the city, and it has a big effect on the flow of talent and influence in these different organizations. And so have you seen these changes over time, and do you do work to interpret what's driving those changes, which then has important lessons for both the municipalities and the nonprofits?
So it's StewMap, as you know, and good to see you. It's the level of analysis is the organization. So individuals moving between organizations would not be captured. There's been a push to capture more sort of organization composition data, looking at like diversity and hiring and things like that. But as it stands, we really just know at the organizational level. I will say my experience in Baltimore at the individual level, there was a time when there really was a revolving door between like Parks and People, Blue Water Baltimore, later, I guess, Baltimore Tree Trust, but there were a lot of young professionals working for these environmental nonprofits that were rotating through different nonprofits or starting their own nonprofit or things like that. So there's a lot of people that have collaborated together for a long time under different organizational umbrellas at different times. So I've certainly witnessed that just in my own experience. As for cross-sector, that's a great observation about people wanting to work for the city and then wanting to work for NGOs. I'd have to think more about that. But that would be sort of auxiliary to StewMap. There's nothing in this data that would directly capture those kinds of changes over time, or ebbs and flows, as you asked. Sorry for an unsatisfactory answer.
I guess I had another question, as long as there's a pause here. Does the analysis capture really small groups? So, as there's been a lot of distrust between the municipal authorities, in particular the police and the neighborhood groups, and that many neighborhood groups small neighborhood groups have sprung up in response, providing a lot of kind of social services or interface between the municipality and the neighborhoods. And does the StewMap capture those really small groups?
I think we do our best effort to include them. I think, we saw many of the groups with really small budgets, $1 budgets, few member groups are certainly in there. I think we're biased towards the larger, more professionalized, more connected groups. By collecting the list of lists, which originally I failed to mention, it does bias towards a network that's already been identified in a sense. I think we're missing what might be called isolates, organizations that don't have an explicit network tie. There's no way to know that. Most of the network data never got the survey. So we send it to you and you say, I work with A, B, and C. And we say, oh, we never heard of these groups. And we send them the survey and they don't respond. Maybe they don't fit the umbrella of the definition of environmental stewardship anyway. Maybe it's an individual, maybe they don't self-identify as those types of stewardship. So there's missingness that's unquantifiable because we don't know the limits of the system. There's also missingness that is quantifiable within. We send it, we send the survey to many, many, many groups, and we see which ones come back. And that we do have a good handle on. There's many metrics to evaluate that. But I get the sense that we have larger, more networked, more professionalized groups, but it's impossible to know that. And nevertheless, we do see isolates in the data, and we see no paid staff members, low budget, 2 to 3 member groups. They do exist in the data. So how many more there are out there, we don't really know.
I will just add, Peter, I know it's like we've been collecting this data for so long, but really we just have the 2 time points. And with COVID and my multiple parental leaves and a variety of things, we haven't dug that much into the 2019 data or done longitudinal analysis. So that's part of what we're so excited to have Selena on board to do.
But it just seems that there's a lot of interesting things to dig into. So
yeah,
she'll have fun and be busy. All right, I was told that questions are 10 cents a piece, 3 for a quarter. So I'm going to go for the quarter. So Nancy, you said the FIA data are publicly available.
yeah.
But is there some way of balancing the publicly available versus spatially explicit, or is there?
Yes.
I always had the impression I would be, if anyone gave me FIA data, they would kill me. They would have to kill me.
So the data are available without the exact coordinates. But we can figure out, whether there's a couple different ways to approach that if we need the exact locations, which we likely do. One is to have someone like Dexter, who is also a, spatial analyst, be the one to work with the FIA data, right? And then send products over to other members of BSEC, or we can actually just go through the effort to get an agreement set up where one of the, PIs or postdocs has access to the data itself. So we can definitely do that, and I'm happy to help. But Ken, yeah, I saw you make a note. Like I'm excited about the timing of this, like that we finally have data available, and I think that we should certainly use it. And I can put a link to, I'll put a couple different links for if people just want to start looking at the data, but we have this app called My City's Trees that is sort of a more user-friendly way to look at the data, but without all of the variables. So it's kind of something that can start poking around with, but then we can just download all of the data from the data mart as well.
Yes, as I put in the chat, Dan Rashuda is our data synthesis expert for the ecosystem modeling, and FIA is not a stranger to us.
Yeah.
And the issues associated with it. Aggregate is probably okay, at least for those purposes.
Okay, great. And I'll just add, just for, FYI, I'm working on a report, like, an old-fashioned PDF report of the Baltimore data with Dexter and with Baltimore City Forestry. And it's great to have their involvement in that process. And they also were involved in the app and kind of thinking of local themes like different layers that they wanted to summarize the data by. So they've been great partners through this.
If I could just jump in, mostly put Mac on the spot, because we've been having a little sidebar here about all this amazing survey data that you all have been collecting over the years, and the Baltimore area survey, which I think most people here know about, but not sure everyone does. Mac, could I put you on the spot and just ask, so like, quick summary of where we stand on that and who might be involved in talking about the next round?
Sure. Yeah, so we just got back data for the 2023 Baltimore area survey, which we were kind of treating as a pilot. And it is a representative household survey of Baltimore City and Baltimore County residents. So it's at the kind of individual level. And there were two questions related to climate change on the 2023 survey, but through BSEC, we have funding to do a lot more work around these issues for the 2024 survey. And we're going to need to start having conversations about what we're interested in asking and finding out, and probably have those conversations in November and December. So would love suggestions about who to include on that for BSEC, and just start thinking about kind of at the individual household level, what you'd be interested in learning.
Go ahead, Larry.
Thanks for the presentation. And I came in a little bit late as I had a faculty meeting. There's a set of applications that interpolates forest inventory data from the plots to the landscape. John Coulston down at Blacksburg has been driving some of this, but there's a set of others. So sort of similar to the discussion we had about soils. Are there any useful products that interpolate or attempt to map species distributions or even communities at the full landscape level in urban areas? So similar to soils, highly disturbed, highly manipulated. But how do we go from plots to landscape?
Yeah, great question. I don't think there are yet, but this has come up within kind of the urban FIA team. And I think within FIA, they are so strapped just to like get the data, process it, and publish it. So it would be ideal to have, a university partner or someone to kind of help develop something like that, but it'd be great.
Okay, aspirational at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dexter, I don't know if I'm related to the Baltimore area survey. I don't know if you want to mention our telephone survey.
Yeah, great point. So it's also an individual level survey. It was conducted in 1999, 2000, 2003, 2006. In 2011, Peter got it funded for Boston, Baltimore, Miami, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Phoenix, and LA. And then now we have 2018 data. And that's a household level survey about recreation, environmental attitudes, preferences, yard management. That's spatially explicit. Those data are on the EDI website and also the Forest Service website, and I'll drop a link in the chat. Unlike Baltimore area survey, it's about people and environment. Baltimore area survey includes, crime, education, transportation, a wide suite of housing, vacancy, things like that. So that's a data set to add. Thanks for that plug. Anything else to mention about that? It's spatially explicit. Questions on that can come to me.
All right, great. with that, I see we're just about at time, and I'm going to see some of you in like 10 minutes on yet another seminar, webinar type thing. So we should probably cut this off. But thank you, Nancy and Dexter, so much. I mean, lots of food for thought here, and just exciting to hear about all the work that's been done and the work to be done. So we will have follow-up action on BSEC Slack and other discussion forum very soon. Thanks again.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
All right, take care.